At a family gathering, the atmosphere took a sharp turn when Jackson, barely after tasting his meal, aggressively tossed his plate onto the table, filling the room with his frustration. This unexpected act of throwing food in dismay left all our relatives staring in disbelief, as no one had ever witnessed such a spectacle. "Why would you serve such terrible food?" he angrily accused. "How can anyone tolerate these poorly prepared dishes, especially from a housewife?" He scoffed with disdain. Looking back at him with a mix of sadness and understanding, I calmly responded, "I wasn't the one who made it." Caught off guard, Jackson's face froze in a mix of embarrassment and confusion, realizing his mistake. It was a rare moment where he showed vulnerability, and for me, Eleanor, it was a significant turning point. After years of feeling sidelined, I found the courage within myself to stand up. I am 29 years old and was working in condominium management until a year ago, when I left my job to embrace the role of a full-time housewife, a decision greatly influenced by Jackson's desire for me to stay at home. Though I had wished to continue working a bit longer, I trusted that we could manage comfortably on Jackson's salary alone. Jackson has a stable career in a prominent environmental consultant, a job that has seen him move between several companies since his graduation. His capability and eloquence caught my attention during our professional interactions, leading me to initiate our relationship. Surprisingly, he reciprocated my feelings, which filled me with joy and pride, so much so that I shared our budding relationship with my friends. Despite their mixed reactions, I was convinced I was experiencing the pinnacle of happiness. After dating for just over a year, our decision to marry felt like a dream come true, despite the challenges I anticipated. Jackson's admission that he'd only be home on weekends due to his busy work schedule was casually mentioned the night we officially registered our marriage, as we sat in our living room watching TV. This casual remark marked the beginning of our new life together, setting the tone for our marriage. Taken aback by his unexpected declaration, I found myself reimagining the married life I had envisioned as anything but ordinary. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, puzzled. "I mean, I'll only be home on weekends." "It'll keep the spark alive, like when we were dating," Jackson explained. His suggestion struck me as odd. A weekend. Only marriage was not what I had in mind, especially since this was the first I was hearing of it. Deciding something so significant without any prior discussion seemed unfair. If a weekend marriage was what he desired, it would have been better to discuss it before we tied the knot, not spring it on me on the day we registered our marriage. While seeing each other less might maintain some excitement, I believed being with the one you love should be a daily joy, not a weekend event. The beginning of our married life was disappointing, leaving me feeling more disheartened than anticipated. Jackson, perhaps sensing my unease or trying to make amends, showed me extra kindness that day. Our first night together as a married couple temporarily made me forget the reality of our limited time together, possibly playing into Jackson's strategy. However, this arrangement was just the start. 3 months into our marriage, Jackson stuck to his weekend-only visits. Despite my eagerness to greet him with a homemade dinner each evening, my enthusiasm faded as he often chose to dine out, barely acknowledging the meals I prepared. I hinted at ending our weekend-only arrangement, but Jackson dismissed my suggestions, arrogantly implying his dominance as if his wishes were all that mattered in our home. I realized then that his insistence on me becoming a housewife was a ploy to ensure his control, making me economically reliant on him and less able to challenge his decisions. This revelation highlighted the true nature of Jackson's intentions, revealing a side of our marriage I hadn't anticipated, especially during those quiet nights alone. Lying in bed, tears of frustration rolled down my cheeks, overwhelmed by the state of my marriage. I couldn't help but wonder how we ended up here. I had dreamed of a happy marriage, but now it seemed like a distant fantasy. Feeling trapped in a situation with no clear exit, my hope dwindled with each passing day. Our marriage, now in its 3rd month, was more strained than ever. Jackson's visits became sporadic, even on weekends, which broke our initial understanding. The essence of marriage seemed lost when we barely spent any time together. I knew I needed to gather my courage and address our issues once more. On a particular Friday night, Jackson returned home reeking of alcohol, his presence marked by a faint, sweet scent reminiscent of osmanthus. A surge of unease washed over me, but I pushed aside my suspicions. Despite his inebriated state, Jackson firmly repeated his unwillingness to change our arrangement. "This isn't what we agreed on," I protested, pointing out the discrepancy between his promises and his actions. His reaction was immediate and fiery, his face flushing with anger as he accused me of complaining unnecessarily and challenged my expectations of our marriage. Jackson's demeanor had shifted dramatically since our wedding day. The caring person I married seemed to have vanished, leaving me to question his reasons for marrying me in the first place. Overwhelmed by the confrontation, I retreated to my room. Later, seizing a moment when Jackson was preoccupied, I ventured into his space, not out of spite, but driven by a desperate need to understand the truth behind our growing distance. As time went on, we lived more like strangers than spouses. I ceased to press Jackson on his absences, yet a different, more urgent concern began to overshadow our previous issues. Choosing to maintain a low profile for the moment, I awaited a sign or solution to our troubles. Then, unexpectedly, I received a call from my mother-in-law, who I hadn't seen since our marriage ceremony. Curious and slightly apprehensive about her reasons for reaching out, I answered the phone, hoping for perhaps a new perspective on the situation at hand. Answering the phone, I greeted my mother-in-law, who seemed to be amidst the hustle and bustle of a supermarket visit. "It's nearly Christmas, Eleanor. You'll join us for the celebration, won't you? Everyone's gathering here," she said, extending the invitation for the holiday get-together. I accepted, eager for a change of scenery and perhaps a chance to discuss something that had been on my mind. Seizing the moment, I ventured to ask about Jackson, hoping she might shed some light on his recent behavior. "Have you spoken to Jackson lately?" I inquired, curious if she had noticed anything amiss. She confirmed they'd been in touch more frequently since our marriage, assuring me that Jackson had reported everything was fine. Her words puzzled me. Could our strained marriage really seem fine to Jackson? This discrepancy made me wonder if Jackson was painting a rosier picture to his mother, deliberately masking the truth. My mother-in-law, from what I had gathered, was deeply devoted to Jackson, perhaps to a fault. During our singular encounter, her overprotective nature was unmistakable. With a heavy heart, I confided in her the reality of our situation, that Jackson had set the precedent for our weekend-only interactions, and that his absences had become even more pronounced recently. Her reaction was one of disbelief and anger. "Eleanor, what are you saying? Jackson would never do such a thing. Are you trying to trick me with lies?" she accused, her voice rising in defense of her son. I sighed, not surprised by her reaction, but still disheartened. It was clear she was unwavering in her support for Jackson, unable to entertain the thought that he could be at fault. Frustrated yet determined to stand my ground, I offered, "I'm not lying. If you're truly concerned, I can show you evidence from the past month, recorded inside our home." My attempt to prove my point only fueled her anger. She refused to consider my perspective, firmly siding with Jackson. This conversation underscored the deep divide in understanding and the challenges of navigating family dynamics complicated by loyalty and disbelief. Feeling the sting of my mother-in-law's harsh words before she abruptly ended the call, I wasn't surprised by her reaction. It seemed my role in their family was viewed merely as a suitable partner for Jackson, nothing more. This realization, coupled with the growing strain in our marriage, spurred me into action. I began to plan a significant step, choosing Christmas, the time when Jackson's family would be all together at his parents' house, as the moment to unveil my intentions. Despite not knowing what the outcome would be, I was determined to follow through with my plan. As Christmas approached, I braced myself for what was to come. On the day, I arrived at Jackson's family home, having already set my plan in motion by reaching out to someone Jackson wouldn't expect. Jackson, unaware of my actions, grumbled about the visit being a bother as he got ready. At the house, the entire family was present, including Jackson's parents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. Amidst the crowd, a woman I hadn't met before, likely a hired helper, was busy in the kitchen. She kept to herself, focused on preparing the meal. My last conversation with my mother-in-law hung heavily between us. Her welcome was polite, yet her eyes betrayed a lack of warmth. I lent a hand in the kitchen, contributing to the meal preparation while my father-in-law kept to his usual quiet self, absorbed in the newspaper. When dinner was served, I watched as Jackson, perhaps unwittingly, set the stage for the drama to unfold. He reacted vehemently to a dish he disapproved of, causing a scene by knocking his plate to the floor, his complaint echoing around the room. This moment, charged with tension and disbelief, marked the beginning of a confrontation that would bring to light the challenges and realities of our marriage in front of his entire family. It was a pivotal moment, one that I had both dreaded and anticipated, ready to face whatever came next. The room fell into a stunned silence as Jackson's outburst reverberated off the walls, his plate and its contents now a mess on the floor. The relatives, witnessing such a scene for the first time, could hardly believe their eyes. Jackson's complaint about the food seemed to echo the doubts and disappointments I'd harbored silently for so long. His accusation that I didn't make it, though, I countered softly, challenging his assumption and revealing the depth of his misconception. Caught off guard, Jackson's momentary vulnerability was palpable. His confusion, mirrored by his stunned expression, offered me a long-awaited opening to address the underlying issues in our marriage. "What are you talking about? Weren't you just in the kitchen helping with the meal?" Jackson retorted, clearly baffled by my denial. Indeed, I had been in the kitchen, but not in the capacity he assumed. "True, I was there, but the meal was prepared by the housekeeper," I clarified, pointing towards the supposed housekeeper who had emerged from the back room, drawing the attention of our relatives. Confirming my involvement, I seized the moment to reveal the true identity of the housekeeper. "Let me introduce her properly. She's actually my mother." The revelation left Jackson and my in-laws visibly shocked as they recognized her face. The misunderstanding that Jackson had hired a housekeeper added to the confusion, especially among my in-laws, who had been under a different impression. "Hey, Jackson, you're aware of my mother's profession, right?" I continued, breaking the tense silence. "She's a chef at a fine dining restaurant, known for her exquisite dishes. Yet, she chose to prepare something simple and mildly seasoned for today's family meal. It's puzzling you thought I was responsible for the cooking, considering my location was in the kitchen merely to assist." Jackson's irritation was evident as he raised his voice, grappling with the realization and the implications of my words. This moment, while awkward and revealing, served as a crucial turning point, shedding light on the misunderstandings and preconceptions that had shadowed our relationship. It was an opportunity for clarity, understanding, and perhaps a step towards reconciling the differences that had driven a wedge between us. In the midst of the heated conversation, I pointed out to Jackson that my culinary preferences tend toward the robust, rich in salt, pepper, and bold flavors, quite unlike the subtly seasoned dishes my mother prepared for today's gathering. "You thought I made today's meal because you rarely taste what I actually cook," I said, bringing to light a simple truth that Jackson had overlooked. His surprise at my words left him momentarily speechless, unable to respond, while the rest of the family looked on, bewildered by the unfolding drama. Seeing Jackson at a loss for words, I felt it was the right moment to address the deeper issues plaguing our marriage. I revealed to everyone how, on the day we made our marriage official, Jackson declared his intention for weekend marriages, a concept he had never mentioned during our courtship. This unilateral decision shocked me, and any attempt I made to discuss or challenge it was met with dismissal, as he insisted that a housewife's place was to accept, not question. The revelation of our true marital situation shocked our relatives, particularly striking a chord with my mother-in-law, whose disbelief and defensiveness were palpable. She could not fathom the idea that her son and I were anything but blissfully married, as Jackson had apparently led her to believe. Just as the room simmered with tension, a startling interruption came a woman's voice at the entrance. The sudden intrusion made everyone tense, and as the relatives turned their attention to the door, a young woman in a short skirt, sporting bright red nails and glossy hair, stepped into view. Her presence and puzzled question, "Huh, Jackson, what's all this?" added a new layer of complexity to the situation, leaving the room filled with anticipation and confusion over her identity and her relationship to Jackson. Kathy's entrance, marked by a flirtatious call to Jackson and her bewildered gaze sweeping the room, left everyone but me struggling to grasp the unfolding scenario. "Kathy, why are you here?" Jackson stammered, his shock evident as he faced who appeared to be his secret partner. "I'm here because you invited me," Kathy replied with an air of confusion, adding, "You wanted me to meet your family, saying we were getting married." Her statement, based on a message exchange she believed was from Jackson, sent a wave of disbelief through him. "I never sent that," he protested, but the plot was already thickening. Stepping between them, I introduced myself as Jackson's wife, revealing that I was the orchestrator of this unexpected meeting. "Sorry, Jackson, but I sent those messages without your knowledge," I admitted, leaving both Kathy and Jackson speechless. Since the invitation to the Christmas gathering by my mother-in-law, I had been meticulously planning my confrontation with Jackson. 5 weeks prior, seizing an opportunity while Jackson was occupied, I had taken his phone and discovered his frequent communications with Kathy, laying the groundwork for today's revelation. The room buzzed with whispers as our family processed the situation, their expressions turning to shades of disbelief and concern. My actions were driven by the suspicion that arose shortly after our marriage transformed into a weekend-only affair, leading me to question Jackson's affection and the authenticity of our life together. Despite Jackson's feeble attempts to justify his absences with work obligations, my doubts only deepened. The late nights he returned home, carrying the scent of another's perfume, pushed me to take further measures. "That's why I hired a detective," I finally disclosed, watching as the realization and panic set in for Jackson. This admission was the climax of a long, simmering confrontation, prompted not just by jealousy or spite, but by a need to unveil the truth that lay hidden beneath the veneer of our strained marriage. It was a moment of revelation that shook the very foundations of our relationship, laying bare the secrets and lies that had been meticulously guarded until now. I calmly took out the infidelity investigation report from my bag, showing it to Jackson and Kathy. This report was the result of an investigation I had initiated some time ago, which quickly unearthed evidence of Jackson's unfaithfulness. It was filled with undeniable proof of their deceit. The report revealed that Jackson and Kathy began their relationship 5 years prior, when Kathy was just 17. Jackson had approached her on the street, and they started dating. Given Kathy's age and her current job in the nightlife industry, it was clear that her parents would hardly approve of their union. Pressured by his own parents to settle down, Jackson chose me as the more convenient option, planning to continue his affair with Kathy under the pretense of being swamped with work. I meticulously pieced together the detective's findings with the messages exchanged between Jackson and Kathy, exposing their betrayal. Jackson attempted to defend himself, claiming innocence, but the solid evidence laid out made it impossible for my mother-in-law to keep defending him. She resigned to the truth, her posture slumping in defeat. Jackson and Kathy exchanged nervous glances, their confidence crumbling. Breaking the tense silence, Jackson accused me of stooping low by unveiling their secrets, labeling my actions as dishonorable. Feeling a surge of anger at his audacity, I retorted sharply. I pointed out his deceitful behavior from neglecting our home right after our marriage to secretly planning a life with someone else while using me as a cover. I declared that not only would we divorce, but he and his secret partner would also be financially responsible for their actions. My gaze locked onto Jackson and Kathy with an intensity I had never shown before, demanding accountability. Kathy, caught in the crossfire, pleaded for leniency, claiming she had no means to pay any compensation in a moment filled with emotion. I raised my voice louder than ever, urging Jackson and Kathy to leave our home immediately. As they hastily exited, I turned to the gathered relatives and apologized for the disruption, attempting to calm myself amidst a wave of sighs from those around me. Everyone seemed shocked by Jackson's actions, struggling to find the right words to express their disbelief. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, who had once placed her faith in Jackson and wrongly accused me, now avoided my gaze, clearly embarrassed. After this incident, my mother who had been masquerading as a housekeeper to support me, and I left my in-laws' residence with little hope of ever returning. This marked the end of a challenging year-long marriage with Jackson. A few days later, Jackson signed the divorce papers, which I promptly filed at the city office, marking the start of my new life as a single person. Though the divorce added a mark to my personal history, our marriage had been so brief and superficial that it hardly felt like a change. Since Jackson and I had been living in a rental apartment, I was able to arrange for him to move out without significant difficulty. Despite having a job at a technology consultant company, Jackson found himself financially drained, largely due to his habit of buying lavish gifts for other women. Consequently, he was forced to seek financial assistance from his relatives. However, after witnessing his behavior during the Christmas debacle, they were reluctant to help. With no other options, Jackson had to secure a bank loan. Kathy faced a similar situation, obtaining a loan to cover her part of the financial settlement. With both now burdened with debt, their plans to marry were put on hold until they could manage their finances. Both families concurred that postponing the wedding was the wise decision, probably tired of being caught up in such dramas. Compared to the struggles I faced over the past year, the idea of them working to pay off their loan seemed almost trivial. Meanwhile, I've returned to my previous position at a condominium management company, finding solace and satisfaction in my work again. It's a welcome change for my mental well-being after being confined at home. As I move forward, I've made a silent promise to myself. If I ever decide to marry again, it will be to someone who values and supports the idea of both partners working.